Media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center here at 90 Way Boston Street in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. It's a rainy, windswept evening here in La Prave. What better place, what better time to come downtown, cozy up in one of Rhode Island's finer institutions. Elbow up at a bar or perhaps one of the bistros that Rhode Island is so famous for, whether it be places like Red Stripe, Custom House, Pot au Feu. There's food for the soul and food for the brain here in downtown Providence. Don't stay home. Don't succumb to the TV. Watch our show, and the minute our show is done, just come on downtown. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. CoalitionRadio.us, where this show and all other shows in our earlier format by radio are archived, or with a direct link to our YouTube channel, where you can watch tonight's show in perpetuity. Joining me live in studio is a repeat offender on the Coalition. He's been with us in a number of capacities, both as a General Assembly candidate, as an educational activist and a parents' rights activist, and now, we're proud to say, as one of the longtime sponsors of the show, we've managed to figure out a time where he can come in and talk about his business. What's fascinating about this is that this is one of those industries which is so pervasive in our lives, so important in our life. One day we wake up, we realize we need them. And it's important that we support local businesses who support independent media. Believe me, it's not politically popular to support this type of programming. So when folks have the fortitude, the courage to do so with their hard-earned money, we want to reach out to them and give them every opportunity to promote themselves, particularly in situations like this where you may very well find yourself in need of his services, potentially, hopefully not, but on an emergency basis. Of course, we're talking about AirSciences.net or AirSciences, mold remediation, biohazards. We're going to talk all about all of it tonight. Daryl, welcome back to the Coalition.
Thanks for having me, Pat.
All right. So let's talk about the genesis of your business. You've been at this for a few years now. You've got quite a bit of experience. What led you to forming AirSciences?
Somewhat serendipitous. I actually went to school for environmental engineering.
Mm-hmm.
I don't use practically any of that education now, as my focus in school was really more on wastewater treatment.
Right.
Got out of school like most people, didn't use my degree for anything, did a variety of things from technology sales and real estate. I had a spec home building company where we built modular homes in Providence metro area for a few years, and that really led me to at that point, there was a company local, they're no longer around, and they were strictly a mold remediation company.
Mm-hmm.
And I became familiar with the partners as they were strictly a biological company. They had little understanding of building performance and a lot of the issues that even really contributed to or would cause some kind of indoor environmental concern. I acted as a construction consultant for them. And then they ultimately, one of the partners was moving on, and the partner who was left behind didn't know what he was going to do. I was looking at a housing market that was turning, and felt like it would be my best interest to go in a different direction. And over a cup of coffee, AirSciences was born. My partner eventually moved on. He's actually working for one of the medical marijuana compassion centers and their grow operations. But we really, when we started AirSciences, we actually started as Air Quality Sciences.
Right.
And we operated under Air Quality Sciences for a couple of years until we were contacted by a very nice gentleman from Air Quality Sciences in Marietta, Georgia, who informed us, as we already knew, that we shared the same name and they had the federal trademark on it. So at that point, he was actually very nice about it. There was no cease and desist orders or anything along those lines. Ultimately what happened, he said, now that you've been around for a couple of years, and because the internet was becoming more and more pervasive as far as a means of finding businesses, when people would Google their name, we started coming up. Because we were operating in a different state, incorporated in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, we were allowed to operate under that name, and less as within those states.
Right.
However, because they had the federal trademark, if they were to open even a paper office in either one of those states, we would be relegated to using the name in the county where our headquarters was located. So they were very kind about it, and said if we would accelerate our changeover to a new name, that they would help cover the cost of doing so, and ultimately we ended up as AirSciences.
Excellent. How many years have you been in business?
14.
14.
So it flies by.
Well, and listen, this show has waxed on poetically, sometimes not so poetically, about the challenges of running an independent business here in this place we call the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. There are challenges that are unique to this environment, not the least of which is regulation, costs, regulation. So congratulations on coming up on your 15th anniversary.
Thank you.
You tackle a number of areas. What homeowners now, they are bombarded with information about everything from asbestos to lead to mold. Sometimes it's difficult to sort out the reality from the scare tactics. And at times I think people almost, it becomes white noise to them. What are some of the legitimate concerns that you face here in Rhode Island? You know, the housing stock is older, largely. We are in a, right off the ocean, we are in the ocean state. You do have issues ongoing with this older construction. And you've got some challenged urban centers here. What are typically the issues that you face here, and under what type of construction?
Everything has its pluses and minuses. You talk about older construction. There are actually some benefits from a mold standpoint when you talk about older properties. They aren't built as tight as the new construction. The materials used in those properties is also much different than what we use today.
So when you say not built as tight, what do you mean by that?
Every house breathes, as far as when the house is constructed, how much air infiltration is allowed, because modern properties, and there's actually modern energy code that requires certain things as far as insulation, air sealing. You have lead housing, which is a whole, that's where it gets really hyper as far as energy conservation and performance. So ultimately, newer houses, they're going to perform better. They're going to be tighter. We use our houses a little bit differently now than we did, say, 100 years ago. We tend to bathe a lot more, use showers instead of baths. Our cooking might be a little bit more dynamic now than it was 100 years ago.
Right.
So the use of these properties is really what's going to impact how it performs and the potential impact of moisture in an indoor environment, things along those lines.
Right. So, and then you talk about the construction materials.
Correct. So if you look at an older house, 100 years old, you go down into the basement or the attic, what you'll find is rough sawn lumber. The 2x4s or 2x6s are actually 2 inches by 6 inches,
right.
Where now it's nominal dimensions. That was all slow growth wood. So it's all hard pine, yellow pine. And because it's slow growth wood, it's got a lot of grain to it. The grain's very hard. It doesn't have a lot of cellulose to it, and mold likes the cellulose. It's its favorite. It's his favorite food source. So the modern lumber is going to be, if you look at the lumber in like a Home Depot or Lowe's or something along those lines, it's very blonde. It's very soft. You can dent it with your thumbnail. It's high cellulose content. It doesn't have a lot of grain to it. So it actually has more food for mold, and it's softer, it holds moisture, it's easy for mold to attach to and digest. So you'll have modern construction materials, and we've seen quite a few situations where I have a personal friend who they had an 1850s farmhouse. It was a stacked stone foundation. It wet during rain, and they had moisture in that space. They built an addition on it, and within the first year, they contacted me because they were furious with the contractor who built the addition, because he had to have done something wrong because there had mold all throughout the basement area, the unfinished basement area of this addition. Ultimately, what the cause was, it was a basement. It's a humid environment. The old wood had a much higher tolerance for mold and moisture than the new materials did. So even though the condition was the same, the new materials couldn't sustain it, and they ended up having a mold problem.
how about what is commonly referred to in the non-professional building market, the fall particle board?
So there's various degrees of or different kinds of materials there. There's OSB or oriented strand board where you see big flakes. There's traditional fiber board and things along those lines. They're compressed wood products. They're processed. What you generally find with like an OSB, there are a lot of waxes and glues and sealants. So there's a little bit of a coating there that may inhibit. If you get condensation or moisture on the surface, it may be a little bit more tolerant, but when it comes to a remediation and corrective action, because it does have these glues and these kind of, I would say they're like a polyurethane, but some of that type of coating on the surface, it becomes a little bit more difficult as far as removing the physical evidence of mold growth when it happens.
Interesting. So in reality, and this in this show we like to say we slay urban legends, the newer material presents more of a challenge to the homeowner than those good old plaque houses up on Bedford Street.
Right. One of the and we've always joked, other than I have some realtors who use us in the Newport area. We always compare Newport with Narragansett. Newport, a lot of older properties, older construction. Mm-hmm. It's coastal, and people down there are and it tends to be more year-round residences. Right. As compared to Narragansett, which has a lot of seasonal properties. The benefit to Newport is they're in use year-round, and people are just kind of used to having mold in those environments. They just kind of see it's part and parcel of being in a coastal environment. Because the properties are in constant use, you're less likely to have a problem as compared to a beach house in Narragansett that gets buttoned up over the wintertime, and it doesn't have that ventilation, that normal use. Doors and windows aren't being opened, and so you end up with temperature differential between surfaces and air and condensation, and where you have those conditions, you'll most certainly have mold growth after a period of time.
Folks, if you're just joining us, you're listening to the Coalition. We're doing a little bit of a practical conversation tonight. Joining me in studio is Daryl Gould. He is a proprietor of AirSciences, celebrating their 14th, soon to be their 15th anniversary here in business in Rhode Island, covering a good part of southeast, southern New England. Mold remediation, biohazards, we're getting into all of it. As I mentioned in the run-up to the show, this show is sort of a keeper. Listen, learn, save the link. Hopefully you won't need Daryl's support, but we're getting into it and we're separating fact from fiction. In that vein, let's talk about mold in and of itself. Okay. Mold is one of those bogeymen. You mentioned mold, and mold is sort of the 21st century equivalent of termites.
Correct.
30 years ago, growing up, you mentioned termites, you could bring a large grown man to his knees. Now it's mold.
Correct.
Why is mold, in what forms of mold, dangerous? I mean, is it a good thing, a bad thing? Is it just...
Dangerous is a strong word for me. And we oftentimes, there's clinical definitions of words. People use the word hazardous. Hazardous to me, as someone as an indoor environmentalist, may be different from the average person. So the mold is not the boogeyman that a lot of people make it out to be. Right. And I often say if you go to a search engine and type in basement mold, attic mold, it's like giving a hypochondriac WebMD.
Well, but let me jump in. I mean, one of our obsession, as we even look at it a night like tonight with weather.com, for example, where all the storms have named, and black mold is talked about in sort of the same terms of Black Death, as an outgrowth of some of these terrible storm systems that have come through. What's the difference between the black mold that has led to mass, everything from FEMA camps to mass knockdowns, to the type of mold that you'll see in a house in Narragansett?
Basically the color. Ultimately, you hear a lot about toxic black mold. Mm-hmm. Some molds have the ability to produce toxins. They're called mycotoxins. Mm-hmm. Mycotoxin, now, for the most part, when you talk about mold and the health concerns associated with it, it's allergen-based. Allergies, the word allergies or allergens doesn't scare people. So that's where people are going to really, lay heavy. People want to scare you. We're going to lay heavy on that toxic black mold stuff. The reality of it is not all black mold is toxic and not all toxic mold is black. The challenge with toxicity is, and really it's a defense mechanism. Mold produces, the species that can do this, produce mycotoxins as a defense mechanism. So if you have a toxigenic species and it's growing on a piece of wet wallboard, for example, and another species of mold is growing next to it, they're competing for food. So the species of mold that's toxigenic will actually produce toxins to kill off that encroaching species of mold. So it's basically just self-defense. And that's a lot of, I mean, mold is biological, so it's going to have some of the inherent characteristics of a biological entity. Self-preservation, you know, we see that a lot with the things you should and shouldn't be doing as far as the products and way you treat things. You know, bleach is a perfect example. For years, the EPA told us use a mix 1%, 1 part bleach, 10 parts water, and that's how you clean a mold problem. The reality of it is, bleach, for a couple of reasons, isn't necessarily the best thing to use on mold, depending upon what the surface is. So, from a remediation or inspection standpoint, we always look at what's the material that needs to be treated, and really for us, it's about is it organic, inorganic, and porosity. So if it's something inorganic and non-porous, so glass, metal, plastic, ceramic, mold can't grow down into the surface.
Right.
So it's literally, and usually because they're inorganic material, mold technically isn't growing on the metal, on the ceramic. It's growing on dirt and debris that is on it, even if it's not visible to the naked eye. We're constantly shedding skin cells. You know, there's what's called biofilm. There's biological and organic matter that creates a surface on everything. And so what happens is that becomes a food source for mold with the right conditions. On the more severe side is going to be highly porous, highly organic materials like processed paper, which is why wallboard is always a huge problem. The surface of most wallboard or gypsum board is going to be paper. So if it gets wet, it wicks moisture up, it spreads very quickly, it holds that moisture. Again, it's processed organic material, wood fibers, so it holds moisture, it's easy for mold to attach to and digest. Mold is a natural part of our environment. We do some limited clean room verification. It's not our core focus, but we do it from time to time. You'll find we're allowed to have a small number of mold spores in a clean room, but where it becomes problematic is if you have mold amplified and actually active in an indoor environment. Because mold's an allergen, our industry, for the most part, is, we call it the Wild Wild West. There are a lot of environmental issues, whether it's asbestos, lead, they're highly regulated. There have been multi-million-dollar lawsuits associated with them. And for those types of hazards, it doesn't matter if you're sensitive or allergic to them. I always use carbon monoxide as an example. It doesn't matter what race, sex, your size, it doesn't discriminate. So when you hit certain parts per million levels in the air, everyone has the same reaction. You hit 50 parts per million, most people are going to get headaches. 100 parts per million, people are going to start getting nauseous. 150, everybody goes unconscious. 200, you're no longer with us. With mold, it's a lot different. Because it's an allergen, how it affects everybody is a little bit different, which can also make it difficult from a diagnosis standpoint. If you have a family of 5 and there's mold in the house, you may only have 2 or 3 people who are actually exhibiting symptoms as a result of their mold exposure. And there may be no overlapping symptomology. So one person might get headaches, one person might get rashes. If you have an underlying health concern, like an autoimmune disease or respiratory issue, COPD, asthma, emphysema, on the autoimmune, it might be lupus, Lyme, or just an autoimmune condition. Now you're predisposed to having issues. Every now and again, over the years, we've had a handful of customers. We had one earlier this year who suffers from a condition called multiple chemical sensitivities. These are people who, if it was 40 years ago, it would be the boy in the bubble. And because now modern medication allows these people to kind of be out and about, these are people who cannot use complex chemicals. They have to use all organic, all natural. So to clean their house, they're using vinegar. If they use something as simple as Windex,
right,
they're going to get really, really ill. They can't use anything with perfumes, with dyes.
Right.
Everything has to be all organic cotton. I mean, no processed, manufactured synthetics, things along those lines. So those people, and again, the example we had a customer, a young woman in Fall River earlier this year. She was a 30-year-old woman who, because she was in a residence that had mold, She was having almost like advanced rheumatoid arthritis type symptomology. She couldn't turn her head more than 10 degrees. She couldn't open her jaw more than half an inch. She actually had mold and mold growth on her skin as an infection because her body just didn't have the capability to fight it off. And that's, the other challenge with mold from a diagnosis standpoint is, where mold's, like I said, it's a natural part of our environment. It's everywhere. So you can't test us for mold because everyone will come back positive. It's in all of our blood. Mm-hmm. However, the test is actually very similar to how they test for HIV. If you're allergic to mold and your body is going to treat it like an infection, it'll actually create antibodies that are species specific. So if penicillium is a great example because there are a lot of people who are allergic to penicillin. If you're allergic to penicillium, your body will actually create antibodies, treats like an infection, that are species specific, so you'll have antibodies for penicillium in your blood, and that's what you test for. You don't test for the actual penicillium, you test for the antibodies in it. It's called mold antibody and symptomology testing. And that's a really, that's generally when people are having that difficult finding out what's causing me to get sick. That's, I'd say a large portion of our business is going to be real estate transactions. People are having a home inspection during the purchase or sale of a house, and the home inspector will find what they might characterize as suspected mold growth. They're not specialists in what we do, so they're actually not certified to identify it as mold, as simple as that may be. Right. It's liability avoidance ultimately. So they might find a situation where, there may have been a water intrusion at the house or improper ventilation, and it caused a mold problem. So we'll come out, inspect, and then based upon our findings, go from there.
Well, and that brings up a critical point, because I would imagine there's two primary motivating events that would stimulate an interaction with AirSciences or a company like that. Number one, you've got a home inspection. That seems to be the great, that moment in time. Is it a relatively recent phenomenon that home inspection has become so sensitive to that? When I posted that you were coming on the show, a couple of people weighed in and said, we did a home inspection and the guy missed it. Is this a response to federal guidelines or just a heightened sensitivity to the issues surrounding mold in and of itself?
We rely more on industry standards than we do the government, mm-hmm. which as a libertarian is awesome.
Absolutely.
So
did I mention we're both libertarians?
So basically the challenge, like I said, the EPA for years gave recommendations. They give recommendations for mold in schools, and ultimately where things kind of changed, and we liken the EPA to a battleship. It takes an act of Congress and 5 miles of open water for it to change direction. Right. What happened was Hurricane Katrina. So I said for years it was use bleach and water. Why bleach and water is bad is actually a couple of reasons. Bleach is basically a salt. And your average household bleach, if you go to get whatever product you use for your laundry, generally that's going to be around a 4% bleach, and the rest of it's water. Mm-hmm. It's a hypochlorite solution. So what happens is if you get even a higher concentration, like an antimicrobial bleach, that now there's a standard, and you have to be at least 8.2% hypochlorite. Now the challenge with mold from a corrective standpoint is mold has two primary biological parts. It has, and I know this is dry stuff, but it has the mycelium. That's the flowering body. That's the black, brown, yellow, green.
That's what you see.
That's what you see on the surface. Mold also has hyphae. You can see hyphae on the surface. Generally, that's in a disaster restoration, big time water event, flood environment, where it has everything it needs and its ideal conditions for growth. Right. You'll see it growing across the surfaces. You might actually see it hanging down from ceilings like vines. Wow. The hyphae are actually what grows down into the material and releases digestive enzymes to break down the mold and use it as food. So because bleach is a salt in its ionic structure, it actually doesn't penetrate below the surface. So it will bleach the color out of what you see, but it actually doesn't penetrate below the surface and kill the hyphae. And just like a weed, if you don't kill the root, it will come back. Right. This is part of the reason why mold has this awful reputation for being difficult or impossible to correct. Most people, your exposure to mold is going to be on your bathroom ceiling. It's a high humidity environment. We use our showers all the time. And so you'll get some mold spotting around your shower. You go get your bleach-based mold and mildew bathroom cleaner, and you spray it on it. It bleaches the color out of it. You think the mold is gone, but actually you've just destroyed the surface. Cut off what's above the surface, and the root remains. And eventually it's going to grow back. You can paint over it. It'll grow through the paint. So where the EPA really kind of tacked and made a change in what their recommendations were was Hurricane Katrina. Obviously there were tens of thousands of flood houses, and FEMA's down there and they have a finite amount of money, and they're saying what's the most cost-effective way of fixing this
and on top of everything else, the natural environment of Louisiana is
ideal.
Yeah, it's think of it as the petri dish as a state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mold likes about the same conditions we do. It likes some level. It loves humidity and moisture, which we do, and it also doesn't like freezing cold, and it doesn't like scorching hot. So, but yeah, Louisiana is like I said, it's a petri dish.
Right.
So ultimately, what happened was, because from a resource standpoint, there aren't that many remediation companies where they could just say, let's go out and send mold remediation companies out there to fix these problems. Ultimately, they'd say, all right, what's the most cost-effective way of doing this, and what works? So the Army Corps of Engineers actually went down to the Gulf Coast, and they tried a number of different products. Things that were commercially available, peroxide and vinegar and bleach and some, like I said, some very popular borate-based products and household-type cleanings products. And they did some efficacy testing, and ultimately what they found out was, and this isn't limited to just bleach, when you spray bleach on mold, it has a defensive reaction. I say to customers all the time, if somebody comes to your house and is spraying you with bleach and you can't make them stop, eventually you're going to move. And mold does the same thing. So when you do something like that or drastically change mold environmental conditions, it goes basically into a state of shock, and it says, okay, this is an environment that I can't exist in, so I need to produce spores, which are like mold seeds, and put them into the air so they can go float and land someplace else where this condition doesn't exist any longer. The mold spores are the respirable particles that you breathe in and cause a physical reaction. So ultimately, by using bleach, and we get not as often as we used to. I think we've had some large-scale weather events, like you were saying. Whether it's, we might be having one now with this large-scale snow melt. But we've had Superstorm Sandy. We've had the flooding back in 2010. We've had some ice storms, some extreme weather. We're getting bomb cyclones and everything else. So these all, when these large-scale weather events happen, the basic knowledge base of the general public increases. Everybody, after 2010, most people knew what mold was. Depending on where they went for their education or how they were informed, they may be misinformed, but most people had a general idea of what it was and what the potential health concerns were.
Interesting. We're going to take a quick break, but joining us in studio, Daryl Gould, proprietor of AirSciences, airsciences.net. How else can folks find you? And really, what is there any sort of rule of thumb, because this is quite more complicated than the standard vanilla information would have you believe. It's much more subtle and much more nuanced. At what point in time should they be calling Daryl Gould?
Well, we always, as a company, it's always been my philosophy. We do free mold and moisture inspections. I never, at the end of the day, I'm a homeowner. I have a family, and I never like the idea. I'm also a consumer advocate. And I don't hold myself to a different standard. So, just like anything else, if you're getting some home repair done, you want to call 2 or 3 different people. There are some people in the industry who charge maybe as much as $400 or $500 for an inspection. The challenge I find with that is if you're trying to do your due diligence and get 2 or 3 different opinions, you may spend $1,000 without really correcting the problem, but just getting with opinions, and maybe those opinions ultimately are you don't have a problem, so you've really just kind of wasted some money trying to identify something that wasn't there. So for us, we when should you call AirSciences? I think for us it's if you think there's a problem. The big signs are going to be if you go into a space and whether it's home, school, work, and you don't feel well on a regular basis.
Right.
One of the big factors is, again, your body treats mold like an infection. So what will likely happen is you may get a bronchial infection or a sinus infection, and you go to your physician, you get antibiotics. If you come off those antibiotics and you get that infection within a short period of time after coming off the antibiotics, usually that means it's something environmental, because that's just not how your body should be reacting to a standard infection treated
Right.
with antibiotics. So that's something where when you see these chronic issues, most of the symptoms are going to be typical allergy, eyes, ears, nose, throat, but you'll have headaches, rashes. I think it's irresponsible. Some people consider death a symptom of mold. It's extreme, and generally, I don't know many cases of mold actually killing someone where mold is the only factor.
Right.
It may be, again, you have an autoimmune disease,
Exactly.
you have some underlying issue, and mold kind of tipped you over the edge and caused a really severe situation.
There you go. Folks, you're listening to Daryl Gould of AirSciences.net, based in Bristol County, but really supporting the entire southern New England environment. You're listening to the Coalition on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network, broadcasting live at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 98 Boston Street, as we say, in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course our all apolitical billionaire baseball boys club, Wet Dream, Fenway wannabe, just hell bent to separate you from what the few shekels that you have left. Everyone's living in a status hellbound, confiscatory, oppressive tax regime known as Rhode Island. Twitter feed, of course, that's as at Pawtucket is home. Folks, follow all of them. Towards the end of the show, we'll be talking a little bit about the events of this week. Nick Kettle is joining us in the 8 o'clock hour to talk about his lone opposition on the hellbound Senate Finance Committee. We have a great picture of Nick up on our Facebook page and the website right now. It's Nick talking to a constituent, and it appears like one of the other members of the Senate Finance Committee is standing right behind him. So look at the picture, you'll see what I mean. Daryl's website, of course, is AirSciences.net. Again, thanks for coming in tonight, because we're as we love to do here, we're preaching facts, walking away from some of the scare techniques that are so often employed in your industry. There is a Wild West element to your industry. There is a sort of I think your industry went through a phase just 2 or 3 years ago where there was kind of a get rich quick element to it, where we'll get a referral from the home inspector, who might be, and there's some wonderful home inspectors out there, don't let me disparage them, but there are a couple, like in any industry, that are a little bit rogue, and they'll get their buddy in, and a couple $1,000s later, how would you know? I mean, it's just one of those areas where if you didn't have a friend or someone you trust, as I'm fortunate to have, someone's telling you that you're making your children sick by this continued situation. It's a terrible thing to do, but look at our legislature. Anyway, so you've got mold as sort of the bogeyman that's out there, but there are clearly other biohazards, other issues that you deal with on a regular basis. Tell us a little bit about some of the other challenges that you face on a daily basis here in Southern New England.
Some of the other services we provide are hygiene-related services, premise sanitizing. That tends to be somewhat seasonal. We do treatments for a variety of different environments, whether it's daycares, medical, athletic environments, and there's really been a lot of a lot of guys on my staff say it's not all champagne and women in the environmental industry, and they couldn't be more accurate. But there's some really cool technology, certainly on the hygiene side of things. When you talk about nano encapsulants and the different products we have available to us now to treat things like biological contamination.
Right, because for example, we've had a couple situations in the last almost yearly now where you have noroviruses kind of sweep across some of our schools. Right now you've got a major, I guess one of the more aggravated influenza levels that we've seen in recent history, and ironically, it appears to be, correct me if I'm wrong, a type of influenza that wasn't predictable as part of the vaccination. So now you've got schools, that are essentially have become temporarily, at least, sick buildings.
Right.
What's involved in that process?
So what we see a lot of times, and the schools are a perfect example, daycares as well. We have one of our customers, she's actually a fellow libertarian, Annalie Barretto, operates the Garden Play School down in Warren, Rhode Island.
Okay.
Annalie,
Wonderful, wonderful facility, by the way.
and Annalie, she stands out as a customer for a couple of different reasons. First, she is very, very detail oriented. Where especially when you talk about like in-home daycare, they're not data people. They might be excellent at taking care of kids, but they're not pouring through attendance data. Anna Lee is just that kind of person where she's also a germaphobe. So for us, she's informed, she's educated, she cares. She has I forget what her student count is, but she has a lot of students there. So she has the ability to really see before and after efficacy of our treatments. And she's been a longstanding customer of ours, and she does it because she honestly believes that it improves the health of her indoor environment. As from a business standpoint, where that benefits her is she's actually been able to see improvements in attendance of her staff and the students.
Right.
So for her, where obviously if you're sending your kids to a sick daycare, when they actually become the student that gets sick, you call mom and dad and it's, your kid can't come to school today, you need to keep them out because they're ill, you need to take a day out of work.
It's a disaster.
It's a nightmare, and where so it allows her to reach attendance levels with staff and students that other schools just can't do because she's proactively treating the environment.
She's not waiting for that sick out. She's not reactive.
Right. And there are, I think one of the most egregious examples of that was, it was a few years ago. It was probably 7 years ago, give or take. We had the swine flu outbreak.
Right.
And one of the schools that was hardest hit by that was the Rhode Island School for the Deaf. They have a new facility now, their older facility. And the challenge for them is, their staff needs to, a typical high school, if they have 20% of their staff out, they just call off the substitute teacher roles and they can staff. You need people who know sign language. So ultimately what happened was they were down 40% of their faculty was out. And they had to bring in substitute teachers that didn't know sign language in very limited cases and weren't able to communicate with the students. And this is a huge problem, obviously. So we would go in and do basically some decontamination from a biological standpoint. Like I said, some of the products we have now are really amazing in what their capabilities are. So we'll do some things like we have some, as an indoor environmental company, I think everything we use is people, pet, and plant safe. We're not going to introduce anything in the environment that could potentially cause an environmental issue. But we have a set of products that are peroxide based. We aerosolize them, so we put them in the air we atomize them and put them in the air as an air and surface treatment. They're one product in particular. The challenge for us from a biological standpoint has always been, bacterial stuff for the most part is fairly easy to treat. You might get some staph and MRSA that tend to be a little bit more resilient and resistant to some treatments. Where we really always struggled was viral contamination.
Right.
Viral contamination isn't active until it has a host, so it's very difficult to kill because it's not actually technically living. It's viable, but it's not active until it has a host. So viral contamination has always been very, very challenging for us. And this product came out about a little over a decade ago, and it was revolutionary. And so it allows us to treat a lot of these things. It's also a product that, while it's not part of mold remediation protocol, because there's a process that, as a certified remediation company, we follow, you're allowed to add things to that process. You're obviously not allowed to take things and peel things off.
Right.
But this product is very effective in that space as well. Traditionally, we relied on mechanicals to filter the air, where this allows us to actively treat things instead.
And this is clearly beyond the homeowner's capacity.
Yeah.
You're not going out to the big orange superstore to get this stuff, and
No, and it's funny because if you do go to to the big box home improvement stores, there are some products out there. It's probably one of the most prevalent in a retail environment like that, and you pay $40 a gallon for it. It's actually baking soda and water, and in theory, it's not something that we use. It's not what I would consider a commercial grade product or something that's highly effective, because one of the challenges with mold is you can kill mold with the product, but dead mold spores can still be allergenic. So just because you killed it doesn't mean that it can't make you sick anymore. So now you have to physically remove these dead mold spores from the environment. And traditionally that was done through mechanical means. You either wiping things down or HEPA vacuuming. As far as air was concerned, you're using HEPA filtration to filter these things out of the air. So this product, it's called MDF 500. MDF 500, it works a little bit differently. It's not a biocide, it's a decontamination agent. It was originally created for first responders from biological terror attacks as a skin decontaminant. So it was actually intended to be put on your body. That product, where it shines as far as mold remediation is concerned, is if you're allergic to mold, you have a physical reaction. You're actually having a reaction to a protein component in that mold spore. What MDF does is it actually breaks down that protein component and renders it inert. So where 15 years ago it may have been, and I always use the example of when at least when we were kids, I don't know if they're still doing it anymore, we'd go to the dentist a couple times a year for our cleaning, and your dentist would hand you your brand new toothbrush, and he'd say, give it your best shot. And you got your dentist standing in the room, so you're doing the best job brushing your teeth, then you're more better than you're ever gonna do. And then he gives you this mouthwash, which shows you the areas that you missed, and your mouth turns blue or red or whatever the case may be. And you're horrified with, I just spent 5 minutes brushing my teeth and I missed all this. My staff is fantastic. I'm very fortunate. I treat my people well. They treat me well. Even the best of people, if I stuck one of my staff members in a room and said, I need you to HEPA vacuum every square inch of this floor, and unfortunately you can't see mold spores with the naked eye. So I'm asking them to clean something you can't see.
Right.
If I were to come in afterwards and shine, not that this would work, but a black light or some kind of special light that would light up the mold spore that was remaining, we'd all be terrified with how much was left behind. Right. So that's why it's a really great product, because it actively goes out there and treats things, neutralizes it, so you're not worried about removing everything. And that's been a very, very effective product for us.
You do perform a special service, something you've, in full disclosure, anyone who's watched the show before knows that we're libertarians. One of the things that libertarians like to preach is private charity. Something that's been very effective for the community is what you'll do for cancer patients.
Correct.
Or people who need to exist because of an autoimmune deficiency, need to exist in some type of hyper-clean environment. Tell us about that service.
So a few years ago, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And one of the reasons why I even do what I do is on a daily basis, I get the opportunity to help people. Sometimes helping people is telling them they don't have a problem and going on my way. Other times it's correcting a problem that's making themselves or their family or their co-workers or someone sick in the building. So in the spirit of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we decided to offer a free premise sanitizing in the home of anyone in treatment for cancer, for breast cancer. And I was woefully disappointed when 2 or 3 people took advantage of it. I thought I was going to have staff out there, decontaminating houses, and the whole mentality of it, Pat, is really, so when you're in treatment for cancer, obviously your body is fighting that cancer. Right. Your body oftentimes is also fighting against the treatments that do a number on your body. So you really have a weakened immune system, and your body doesn't have the ability to fight off infection like it normally would. And especially if you have had stem cell treatments or things along those lines, which are very, very expensive. Most insurance companies aren't going to do it more than once. So you get one bite at that apple. You don't want to mess that up. So the idea behind doing these treatments is, let's go in and, oftentimes we'll schedule it around a doctor's visit. We're putting something in the air, and even though the product's not dangerous and it's non-toxic, non-corrosive, all that stuff, the human body is not like should be breathing in any respirable particles.
Right.
So we'll schedule around a customer's doctor's appointment or a trip to the store or a trip out to lunch or something along those lines, and we'll come in and do this whole house sanitizing treatment. And it basically is going to neutralize anything biological. The product is active for 28 days and allows their body to focus on recovering and fighting the infections,
Right.
and rather than fighting off the common cold or the flu or whatever might be floating around in the house. So it started initially with Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Like I said, the first year we weren't all that excited about the traction we got. So the next year when it happened, we opened it up to any treatment, any form of cancer. And then, at the end of the month, again, it wasn't, it's very rewarding to do good for people. And I find it personally rewarding, and I felt like I got robbed of the opportunity to do good and feel good about myself. So at that point, we made an executive decision to, you know what, if you're going to do good, do it consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've really opened it up pretty much, and it's not, at this point, we don't even limit it to cancer treatments. I've had people who have, I know a couple in the town that I live in where the husband needed a kidney and his girlfriend actually gave him a kidney. You know what? If they're giving up a kidney, the least I can do is give up a treatment. And so in cases like that, we'll go in and treat their house for them at no charge. And we have some oncologists at Dana-Farber who refer us out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something where, we'll do it pretty much anywhere in our service area.
Right.
So while our core focus area, as far as the area we service, is really all over Rhode Island and Massachusetts, kind of Worcester Metro, follow the pike out to Boston and everything south of that.
Mm-hmm.
We will travel further, and we often get requests to do so. I have a beautiful little 3-year-old girl who has leukemia out in Sturbridge, and so even though it's a quick treatment, we'll drive 2 hours out, deliver the treatment for her, and it takes 15 minutes to treat the house and hop in the car and then drive back home. So,
Well, with any of these services, it's whether you've been sick or you're worried about getting sick, or sometimes tragically you find yourself in the middle of illnesses, the psychological boost that you give to someone when you can look them in the eye and say, okay, you've got not only is your home a safe spot for you to recover in, it's a physically safe spot to recover in. And there's, your home is truly your haven. And you afford people the opportunity to recover in their home, which we all know psychologically is, they're surrounded by their own books, their own family, their own diversions. At least there is the semblance of normalcy that you get when you're at home. And if you're able to use this service to facilitate that, that's huge.
Well, whether you're an 8-year-old boy who falls off his bike and skins his knee, or someone who's at the end of their time on the planet, everybody wants to be home. That's where we're safe. So it's like I said, it's tremendously rewarding to be able to give people the opportunity to stay in a home that otherwise they'd be looking at alternate living arrangements.
Right. No, that's wonderful. Again, if you're just joining us, we've got Daryl Gould, a longtime friend of the show, supporter of the show, sponsor of this show, the Coalition Talk Radio, talking about his business. You'll see the banner up every week. You'll see us describe it in any one of our Facebook posts when we talk about AirSciences. Of course, they can be found at airsciences.net. Mold remediation, biohazards. Do you wear mold suits?
We wear Tyvek suits. And that's kind of.
Are we talking Andromeda strain here?
We've actually, there's different levels of personal safety protection that we wear.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's where some of the fear tactics come in. I know that a lot of people think that when you're undergoing a mold remediation, it's going to look like the end of the movie E.T., where there's a tent over the house and multiple chambers to get in and out, and nobody's doing well at all. Typical safety protection for us is going to be Tyvek suits, full face respirators, certain levels of filtration depending upon what we're dealing with as far as a contaminant is concerned. And that's my staff. They work hard, and it's not, like I said, it's not all champagne and women. For us, we do a lot of work in attics and basements in houses. and
Crawl spaces.
crawl spaces. We see a lot of spiders, a lot of rodents. It's awful. And so where in an attic in the summertime, you may have temperatures at 120, 130 degrees. So my guys were in full face full Tyvek suits, which do not breathe, full face respirators, and they're in and out of those environments, on a daily basis. So where one of my concerns moving forward, we always act responsibly, and for me, safety is going to be first. So there are some things we've done over time, as far as we have what are called phase change cooling vests.
Yeah.
These are vests that my staff can wear in the summertime that keeps their body temperature regulated, so they're not worried about heat stroke and overheating and things along those lines. Those are things we employ during the summertime. One of the challenges we're going to see is, like I said, our industry has been fairly unregulated because it's an allergen, so it's very hard to set these standards for it as far as what's acceptable and what isn't. We're starting to see some regulation come in through OSHA as far as we may have to start keeping really focused, detailed information as far as the environment from a temperature standpoint and personal safety protection with our staff. So we always err on the side of caution, always have, because I don't want my staff getting sick or ill or hurt. But what we might see is, and there's some standards we go by now, but we may really have to start keeping these detailed logs on what's the temperature. Everyone's going to have personal thermometers, and there's going to be these formulas based upon temperature and personal safety protection that say this is how long you can be in these environments. And obviously, if you deviate from OSHA regulations, then it can get very, very expensive.
Very, very, very quickly. So let's kind of do a refresh and review. First of all, you've been in business going on 15 years, fully insured.
Correct.
There are services available to folks who are suffering in terms of autoimmune diseases, in terms of what you're willing to, you're willing to provide essentially a biohazard cleanup, if you will. The materials you use are long-term pet friendly?
Yeah. We do a lot of odor neutralization in pet environments for pet odors, things like that. Like I said, everything we use is people, pet, and plant safe.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these products you could eat them if you wanted to. I don't recommend it. For people who are really sensitive, we have lines of products that are strictly organic. So when you are dealing with people who are highly sensitive to complex compounds or synthetics, those get removed, and we'll replace them with the organic product suites. We do residential and commercial duct cleaning, and I think our obligation to any of our customers is really first and foremost inform and educate. Much like you said at the beginning of the show, Pat, I don't wish my services on anyone, but I'm happy to help people when they actually need us.
Right.
So there are a lot of times what a lot of people in our industry don't do is be honest with the customer, because sometimes being honest means you're not going to earn any money as a result of the interaction. So, and mold is a perfect example of that. When you perform a formal mold inspection or investigation, there are 4 classifications of mold growth. A class 1 being the lightest, and a lot of it has to do with just square footage coverage of the mold growth you see. A class 1 is under 10 square feet of visible mold growth, which is what you find in a lot of typical day-to-day, bathroom mold, things along those lines. Mm-hmm. So a class 1, even by industry standards, doesn't require professional remediation services. It's viewed more along the lines of mold cleanup than remediation. So when we do come across those situations, we always lead with, we're here to help, and helping the customer is doing what's in their best interest, not ours. So more often than not, and I have pages after pages of documents I've created that are basically cleaning and treating instructions for things like bathroom ceilings. So if a customer calls us, we're more than happy to come out and look at it, and if we want to take some basic air quality readings, we have some equipment that allows us to do that real time at no cost. Obviously, like anything else, you can spend tons of money on testing if you want to. Even though we do testing, personally, I'd like to see people put money into corrective action if they need it, rather than drilling down into the bits and bytes of what species might be present in the house. So that's where, like I said, my first job is to inform and educate. If you don't have a problem, you don't need us, I'm more than happy to tell you so. We'll give you instructions on how to clean it yourself and go on our way.
Right.
So, but I think, like I said, we're customer first. I think, you know, especially being in an industry that's very standards based, and there are people who certainly deviate from standard certified remediation protocol and things along those lines, and have maybe the kindest way I can put it is creative solutions to try and fix problems.
Right.
You know, it's really about, you know, helping people. And you know, I tell people on a daily basis, I always make myself available, you know, virtually 24/7. If you're sitting in bed at night and worried about mold and you have a question, I always tell people, give me a call. I'm more than happy to help. It's, like I said, I find it very personally rewarding to help people. It makes me feel good about myself. So don't rob me of the opportunity to feel good about myself. If you think we can help, call me. Obviously, I'll talk, and I'm more than happy to inform, educate, point in the right direction, whether it's using us, going in a different direction.
And in the case of crisis, there is a, you know, AirSciences.net. You can sort of break glass, you know, do the emergency call. For me, what's particularly intriguing is the high, you know, home education. You know, you've got these sweet little petri dishes, you know, oozing. As a husband of a teacher, I can tell you they're oozing every imaginable disease known to man, and they're perfectly willing to give you a big squeezy hug. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. One of the so for hygiene testing was always we had to have to take samples and send them off to an accredited lab. It's always time consuming, and it was a little bit expensive. And about the time swine flu hit, there was a company that produced a handheld ATP monitor, which, long story short, is basically allowed us to take real-time swab samples, and I could tell you how clean or dirty a surface was. And this was at a point where, let's see, my twin boys were about 18 months old. So this was about eight years ago. And Jackson, one of my twins, when you get a new toy, and when you do indoor environmental work, an ATP monitor is a toy for you. It was really cool. We could take real-time samples, and so basically these standards set. And so just to kind of give you an idea, if you're in a food production facility and you want to test for the cleanliness, because there are certain standards you have to adhere to, if you got a reading above 60, that's considered a dirty environment. You stop the production, you break down the equipment, sanitize it, retest, and you kept doing that process until you got below 60. And I remember at one point, you know, having this new equipment and wanting to get used to it and see, you know, get a feel for what the things around my house, you know, what might they get a reading. And I remember Jack coming over to me to give, and I said, you know, let me see your hand. And so I took his hand, I took the swab sample, I put it in, and he came back a reading about 3,500, which I try not to, you know, I try and be very clinical about what I do, but you see numbers like that, and it's terrifying. And every time he came to give me a hug after that, it was almost like, in my mind, I see he was the hamburger helper, and he had these giant hands that were absolutely disgusting, and he was going to give Dad a hug with them. And so that...
and he's here right now.
He's actually in the back, probably chuckling about this. And I'm sure his brother will call him, you know, big dirty hands or something for the rest of the weekend. But some of this stuff can be unsettling, but you know, it's all how you look at it, and you just try and... I live in a world of science, logic, and reason, and that's where the lane we try and stay in. And I certainly understand it's very easy to get emotional. We're talking about health, family, and home. And there is anything, I've heard some wise guy answers, but what's more important than that?
And the beauty of AirSciences is that you provide a local, safe, affordable, professional, insured, documented, scientifically based tool to manage all of those issues in one shot. That's fabulous.
Excellent.
Right here in Rhode Island. So don't go on the web. Don't go searching this yourself. Don't go making yourself crazy at the big box department stores. There's an affordable, again, science-based alternative here locally. Daryl Gould, AirSciences.net, supporting really a good section of southern New England. Whether it's a homeowner, whether you've got someone in your family who is challenged physically, and whether it be autoimmune or just simply in recovery, where a stringently clean environment will aid that recovery both physically, and also psychologically. If you run a home, in your home health care, if you run a home education setup, these are, quite frankly, these are tools that, much larger organizations maintain internally. You've got access to them on an as-needed basis. Thank you very much for joining us, and again, thank you for your support of the show.
My pleasure.
It's just great stuff.
Thank you.
Folks, we're going to take a quick break now. I hope he's in studio. Mr. Burbick is here. We're going to talk about, we're going to go political, hardcore for the rest of the show. We're going to be talking about the need for an inspector general. We'll go political for a second here. Why would we need an inspector in general in Rhode Island? What could possibly be going wrong?
Everything. Everything.
And in the 8 o'clock hour, 8:15 or so, Senator Nick Kettle,
One of the good guys.
is going to dial in. He's going to talk about being the lone voice of reason in the Senate Finance Committee this week's vote, supporting and embracing crony corporatism without getting into it too deep. It was pretty shocking to see politicians who were self-described as being people-based, progressive, or in some cases conservative, fiscally responsible, openly advocating for what could ultimately be a 9-figure subsidy of a privately owned entertainment operation.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Pat. I think, whether both ends of the spectrum there, from a conservative standpoint, we're looking at small government and controlled spending. Giving, corporate welfare certainly wouldn't fall in that category. And from the total opposite, where you talk about progressives, the idea of giving, millionaires or billionaires millions of dollars for their own private enterprise is astonishing. So the fact that we have people in the General Assembly who are supporting this proponents, it's just like I said, it's indicative of Rhode Island politics and exactly what needs to change in the state.
Right. And somehow the notion that this is how we've always done it is an indictment in and of itself, as I pointed out to Mr. Pires. Right now, somewhere in some home, if you're listening to the Dan York, don't try this at home. Do not put this play right next to RITV because you'll see me twice, and that's just not good. Folks, we're going to take a break now. You are, in fact, listening to the Coalition on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network, broadcasting live here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, here in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. It's a torrentially, is torrentially a word? Torrential.
It is now.
Rainstorm here, but that should not prevent you from the minute this show ends, getting into your car, getting into the Ripter, walking downtown, enjoying any one of the fabulous spots here. It's on a night like tonight that you can enjoy a bistro dinner or a cup of coffee at the Coffee Exchange or a pot of pho or any one of the number of fine establishments in here. It's important that we continue to support our community. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.